Hello, I'm Kimberly Maguire. I am the Interim Director of Counseling Services for Savannah-Chatham County Public Schools. And as we get ready to start what many of you, maybe perhaps you've heard about it, maybe not, something called Red Ribbon Week here in not only our county, but nationwide. And this is an opportunity to make sure that our students and our families are aware of not only the dangers that are associated with drug and alcohol use, but also what we can do to make sure that we are preventing the abuse use of those substances that are harmful to us. So today I have an expert in the field who has been kind enough to join us, and that is Tim Maguire. Same name, not related. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks for having me, first off. And like I said, my name's Tim Maguire, and I work for Wake Up Carolina in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm the program director here. I worked for several years in the alcohol and drug recovery community in the state of Georgia. Just recently moved out here in June. So dealt with populations from adolescents all the way into their 60s and upper 70s on all different types of substances.
Hey, and since you have worked with all of those populations, we're going to use that to help guide us into our conversation for today. And I think the first thing for parents is, this is can be a scary topic or an awkward or uncomfortable topic to talk about with their children. So can we just touch on a little bit about why it's important to even engage them in this topic about substance abuse prevention, and what drugs are and how it can be harmful?
Yeah, well, I mean, one reason to engage is we have to, with the access to everything now, is we have to get to a point to where we can normalize the conversation. We're seeing it a lot more in, getting into like fifth grade. We're seeing that fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, where people and young kids are getting introduced to drugs. A lot of them older sibling, older relative that may be involved and already using some type of substances, and they view them as role models, and it kind of attaches to a lot of those things, or an older friend crowd that they think is cool. And that's how it usually starts. So normalizing the conversation to talk about breaking down some of those barriers. We were talking about before we even got on here, how awkward that conversation can be, because you don't want to step too far into one area. But there's people out there that will help navigate it. Because I mean, the data shows us, a friend of ours did a family workshop recently, Dr. Victoria Magin, and a lot of the data she was collecting, she's a psychologist here in Charleston. Data she was collecting, it says, that teens and adolescents are like 42% less likely to start abusing substances if families are talking to them about the awareness part, right? Talking to them about the family genetics. If you have people in your family that struggle with substance use, paying attention to that and letting them know that this is a trait within the family tree that we see a lot of. So there's different ways to make that normal, and that's why it's so important to have that conversation when they're getting to those age brackets, like getting into fifth grade, going into middle school. We're starting to see a lot of that, especially in particular in the area I'm in right now.
And I think that was very important what you mentioned, how these things occur because of who a student or a child may look to as a role model, and some of those other pieces. So just in that same vein, we can begin by talking about if there's a family history about it, but is there do you have any other tips or suggestions on how you might begin that conversation, perhaps before you even know that there may even be a concern or an issue? Is there a particular book that perhaps may be helpful for youth, or maybe a resource or something that may be helpful for parents?
But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of information. Local recovery community organizations will have a ton of information. We're a recovery community organization here, so their role in their communities, and Chatham has them, is to pump the information out to families to get the knowledge. Now, when the information is presented to the adolescent, it's hard to quote a paragraph and to keep their attention at the same time, so you kind of have that battle of having drop like nuggets. And that's what I've seen is the best, is just dropping some information. Maybe you see a news story right now. We're seeing a ton of stuff on rainbow fentanyl that people are trying to tie it in and make it look like candy, and to get the younger population. So starting those conversations after you see it and just bringing that awareness. And not a lot of families tend to take the deep dive on Google, and then they overthink it, and then the kid's like, what is going on? It doesn't make sense to them. So a lot of it is just nuggets would be the best, and start out slow and just make sure that when you see things or you hear about things, keep tabs on your local recovery community organization, keep tabs on fentanyl in your county, in your district, overdoses. There's news stories on that, and the more information you have, the more you can try to drop nuggets to your child to let them know, like, hey, this is something that we're seeing in our area. I always want you to feel like you can come to me if you're concerned about something, or if you have a friend. That's another number one thing to monitor your child, to see if they're struggling or if they are using substances, is usually their circle of friends. That's the number one giveaway. If their circle of friends are starting to use substances, it usually will end up with them using substances. So you can seek help based off of these flags or markers that you'll catch on to.
And I think that's really important. Again, making sure that you are aware of what's going on in your community, or in your neighborhood with your student circle of friends, but also making sure that, like you said, you don't become so hyper-focused until you not only scare or alienate, your student away from it, but it makes you unable to really have a productive conversation.
Right. The role switches, and you're already an authority figure because you're the parent. But if it comes to something that's that high risk, you become authoritarian to the sense of, like, can I trust that this is something that I saw recently? Can I trust that one of my friends is experimenting with marijuana as something that I can go to my parent about? So you want to keep those channels open as best you can. And I always suggest clinical guidance on that. Therapists in your local community that specialize in substance use can help families a ton with walking that walk.
Right. So in your practice, and I know you mentioned fentanyl, and we've heard a lot, when you mentioned like the rainbow fentanyl piece, and I've heard things about Skittles, and how that actually, may involve different pills and things of that nature, but also vaping. There seems to be a lot of information out there about that. Can you speak a little bit, like what is it exactly, and how is it harmful?
Yeah, so it's funny that we're talking about this, because I had a young adult correct me on my lingo as far as I was calling it like marijuana vaping, and he told me it was a cake bar. So I got educated on that. But what we're seeing with that is that students are using that as a resource to escape, and it's an easy way to tote it around. It doesn't have as strong of an odor as old school marijuana may have had. There is some that do have an odor, but a lot of it's really creative with how they mask it. And what we're seeing is that those cake bars are really spiking some different psychosis that we've seen. It amplifies mental health concerns. The kids' depression, the anxiety. A lot of kids will start doing that, and then they think it relaxes them, when actually it raises the paranoia and anxiety and compounds those things that may be outside of substances that they're already struggling with. So we're seeing a lot more of that. It's exploiting those mental health concerns on some of the young adults when they're constantly, 10, 15 times a day hitting a cake bar, and, they're getting away with it because there's not really too much of an odor. They can do it right there in class.
Wow. And I think that's, a key piece, because we always think, I would be able to smell it, or I would be able to see it. And what you're saying is that may or may not be true. So just being aware
Mhm.
of that particular piece of it.
Mhm.
So let's kind of in switching gears, because we talked about making sure you have those open lines of communication, that if you notice changes in your student, that you are, I guess, having those conversations about what may be causing those things. We know that sometimes if a person is feeling stress, whether or not that's from academics or from other things in their lives, they may turn to various substances. But are there any other things that I guess parents should look out for, or specific changes, I guess I should say, that parents maybe should be on the lookout for with their children, to notice or to know if perhaps substance abuse is becoming an issue?
For like, so if the child's like personality shifts or something like that.
Yes.
So yeah, um, what we're seeing a lot of now is um aggression in the sense of not like to where they're fighting, but they may say more hurtful or cut deeper with their words to try to get their way. That drastic shift that happens. Oh, he was really sweet 6 months ago. Well, one thing we didn't factor in when we actually did the assessment with this young adult, he started using 6 months ago, so his temperament has changed, right? The drugs that or substances he's putting into his body are amplifying these things. So it's usually a drastic kind of change, or it'll be a complete shift, or it may be something that happens like once a week or every 2 weeks, and you're kind of like, hold on, why are they acting funny? That's usually a dead giveaway that there's something going on there, whether it's some type of substance that they're trying to use. And when you're young and you start substances, you're usually, in a lot of cases, what they're doing is overshooting the mark. Whether it's drinking alcohol, whether it's doing some other type of substance, they haven't really had the history as someone that was using it 10 to 15 years. So really any of those personality shifts, as far as like anger, anxiety, isolation, is a really, really big one. Not wanting to talk, not wanting to go in public a lot, closing down. So checking on your child, and just having, again, we're just trying to have an open line of communication to where if something is going on, they could come to us.
And I think those are some really good, things to look out for, with the pieces about aggression. It's not always physical.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is more verbal,
Mhm.
or those being manipulative,
Yeah,
in some way. Not to say all of the time that, there may be a substance use
correct,
issue,
correct.
but those are just some of the things to look out for.
Mhm.
So in keeping with that, if a parent finds that their student is abusing or using a particular substance that is harmful, um, what can they do to help? It can be a long road. There's no quick
Yeah,
fix. I think that's an important piece for
yeah.
families to know. It is going to take persistence. But
Mhm.
what are some of the things that or strategies, I guess I should say, that they could use to actually help their student?
Yeah, there's so many, and it depends on a lot of it's family systems and backgrounds of what's going on. Are they involved with sports? Are they working? And there's a bunch of different things that identify and can be tailored to individual families. But in a general way, is really keeping it to the sense of like, if we get to where we um, are negative about it, it's closing them off. If we make them feel like they are a failure because they've done that, not to say that they shouldn't face consequences for their actions, um, but taking it to a level to make them feel even more guilty than they already are, probably, for being caught. We say this a lot: scare tactics don't work. Ignoring underlying reasons, severe punishment. It's trying to make it a conversation. So coming at it from trying not to be judgmental, if we can do different things to destigmatize it, try to do some motivation. We call it motivational interviewing, but just having like open dialogue, getting them to talk about what's going on with them, coming at them with honest facts and not made up stories, like real concrete facts of what we know, and limit the setting to where they can go out and explore it. So if there's certain restrictions that you may have to put on as a consequence to their actions, and getting them enrolled into something with a therapist that can feather through those things for you. That is what we have seen as the best, because there's usually in the adolescent population, they are using it in a lot of ways because they haven't faced severe consequences, most of them yet. It's still enjoyable, they're still partying, but in a lot of senses, they're also using it because they don't know how to cope with the feelings. All these hormones are coming around and they're like, what is going on? So they haven't learned yet at that age proper coping mechanisms. So getting them in with therapy to try to teach them those things is a huge piece.
I think you have rounded out this conversation with, I think, our true purpose for Red Ribbon Week, for talking to your students at an early age, for normalizing this conversation. And that's the prevention piece, dealing and learning those coping skills so that hopefully you don't see these other things as an alternative to assist you in coping. But if that were to happen, how can we redirect that without shaming the person about what has occurred? And that all goes back to that prevention piece, having a sense of community around the person, around your student, and making sure that you are reaching out to your resources, whether that be your school counselor, therapist in the community organizations that are out there that focus in on this work, in order to help support. Well, Tim, those are pretty much all of my questions for today. Is there other information that you think would be helpful to our audience, to our parents or students that may be tuning in and listening to this recording?
Yeah, I would probably suggest any family workshops. There's a ton of them that are around that you can log into virtually. Some of them are in person. That talk about the dynamics within substance use, that talk about early prevention. Right now with the opiate epidemic that's going on, there's a ton of resources out there. Get plugged in, find out what those resources are. Social media is very, very active with recovery resources and family systems and dynamics. Get plugged into those and be educated when that time comes.
And you mentioned the social media piece or websites. Are there any that you would recommend that we could share with our audience?
Yeah, so Wake Up Carolina is our social media accounts would be a really good one because we post different workshops that we're doing. We have another one coming up in November. Family First Adolescent Services, they're down in West Palm Beach, Florida, but they pump a bunch of information out for families of young adults to get involved with. Any of those resources. Clear Fork Academy, they're out in Texas. They post a bunch of different stuff. And Eagle Overlook is another adolescent service. So they'll have different workshops that they may do with families just to get them the education piece.
Well, listen, I truly appreciate you for sharing the information that you have shared. And parents, we know there's a lot of information. We, of course, cannot cover it all in this one setting, but we wanted to do this as a way of encouraging you to have those conversations with your student during Red Ribbon Week, when you see them coming home with those stickers, or perhaps they're participating in the Crazy Sock Day or whatever the theme day is. We want you to make sure that we are refocusing our students and our efforts on, we want to prevent the use of substances that can be harmful, and at least know that if you find yourself in those situations, make sure that they know of those trusted adults that they can come and have those conversations with, so that we can make sure that we support them on a journey or a path back to wellness and being healthy. So Tim, I appreciate you again for joining us. For our audience, we are going to share some of the resources mentioned during this session, as well as some others that we have. We're going to share that here on our screen in just a few. You've probably seen them throughout this recording, but we hope that information is helpful to you. And again, we just want to reiterate that we want to make sure that we're focused on prevention and those things that will help our students with identifying those healthy coping skills, so that we can make sure that we celebrate a life that is drug-free. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining with us today.
Thanks for having me.